Hi, I'm Rose Young, and I'm super excited to welcome you to today's virtual forum on Australia, a trusted and committed supplier of Australian beef and lamb. Today's virtual forum is presented by Livestock Australia, a producer-owned company that delivers world-class marketing, research, and development services for the Australian beef, lamb, and goat producers. While supporting exporters to get the products into the market, Australia currently exports red meat and livestock to more than 100 countries, including halal beef and lamb into Malaysia. MLA represents Australia's high quality and sustainably produced red meat. And MLA also designs and delivers marketing programs tailored for each market with the overall objectives of increasing market access, market shares, and sales of beef and lamb and goat meat. Joining us today are three notable panelists who will be sharing their insights and information on their roles from the government, industry, and marketing points. Our first panelist, Mr. Sanjay Buttalingam, who is the Australian Agriculture Councillor based in the Australian High Commission in Kuala Lumpur. Mr. Buttalingam was appointed Australia's Agriculture Councillor to Malaysia and Brunei Darussalam in March 2020. Since 2000, he has led a number of national regulatory programs in the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment, and the Australian Treasury covering biosecurity, human health, compliance, and foreign investment. More recently, he was involved in the regulation of Australia live animal export trade. Our next panelist is Mr. Terry Nolan. Mr. Terry Nolan is the director of Nolan Meats, a family-owned integrated meat processing company situated in Gympie, southeast of Queensland. Nolan Meats employ over 500 people in a range of activities, including cattle breeding, backgrounding, feedlotting, beef processing, and distribution of quality halal beef products to international and Australian markets. Apart from his role in the family business, Mr. Nolan holds quite a number of industry positions. He is currently the board member of the Australian Meat Industry Council, and that is AMIC. And our final panelist is Ms. Valeska. Ms. Valeska is the Meat and Livestock Australia Regional Manager for Southeast Asia. She oversees the Southeast Asia team to strengthen trade partnerships and undertake brand building and marketing activities to promote Australian beef and lamb. Valeska has a veterinary background and worked across private and public sectors prior to joining MLA. We'd like you to stay engaged, and we'll take questions at the last part of this forum. And let me begin to ask you a few questions. Sanjay, what is the role of the Australian government in ensuring food safety and halal compliance of Australian beef and lamb?
Thank you, Rose. Selamat pagi, semua. Good afternoon, folks back home. My fellow panelists, great to be part of this discussion. And thank you, Meat and Livestock Australia, for inviting me to this discussion. In Australia, we are blessed with an environment with vast open spaces that's ideally suited to red meat production. And being free from many of the diseases, our produce is always in high demand around the world. We have a strong track record, as you know, when it comes to halal trade, and we supply high-quality halal beef, lamb and goats to over 100 countries around the world. Words that I often use when I describe Australian red meat is safety, quality, traceability, sustainability, and reliability. These words are synonymous with produce from Australia. One thing that may be less understood by consumers in Malaysia is our record when it comes to halal compliance and the regulatory systems that underpin our exports to Malaysia and other parts of the world. While my comments are specific to the Malaysian market, our regulatory systems broadly apply to all halal markets. So the whole Australian halal system for red meat is underpinned by legislation, and we are very proud of that fact. Export Control Act and orders require all export establishments have an approved arrangement, which is essentially a HACCP-based food safety, and quality assurance program that addresses sourcing, transportation, carcass product identification, segregation right through the supply chain, food safety and inventory systems to ensure product and halal integrity. In addition to the Export Control Act, the Australian government authorised Halal program requires the joint supervision and certification by both the Australian government inspectors and the Australian Islamic organisations approved by JAKIM. There's currently 7 halal certification bodies that are approved by JAKIM, but I know that there's a lot more Islamic organisations doing halal certifications for other markets. So their job is to attest the integrity of the halal meat through the different stages of production, storage and transport. Now, before gaining access to Malaysia, our exporters undergo a rigorous assessment of systems and capabilities by the Australian Government Competent Authority, the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment, and the Malaysian authorities, the Department of Veterinary Services and JAKIM. And once approval is granted, red meat processing plants are also subject to regular audits by both governments. Once the product arrives in Malaysia, as a lot of you will know, it is subject to further compliance checks by the Malaysian Quarantine and Inspection Services before distribution to retail. Now, in addition to all of this, the Malaysian government has a permanent halal attaché in Australia who conducts regular monitoring audits of exporters to ensure systems and practices are consistently applied with agreed protocols, and that happens on an ongoing basis. So quite a lot of detail that sits behind what I've just said, and I don't have the time to go into all the details, but the key takeaway, the key message I want to leave listeners with is when you buy Australian meat and meat products, you can be assured of the highest level of integrity and halal compliance. And again, we're very proud of that fact. Thank you, Rose, and I look forward to listening to the other panel members.
Thank you, Sanjay. Terry, if you could explain the role of the industry in the preparation and processing of the meat destined for Malaysia, and what is the Australian exporters' commitment and integrity to supply halal and food safety Australian beef and lamb from farm to table?
Thank you, Rose, and I'll start by thanking everybody for inviting me along here today. I feel it's a real honour to be asked to speak at this forum, and I hope it delivers some value to the participants. Fundamentally, Rose, in answer to your question, the role of the industry in Australia is to produce wholesome, high-quality red meat products to Malaysia in full compliance with Australian export legislation and Malaysian import requirements. As you've already heard from Sanjay, Australia is one of the few countries in the world that has a rigorous regulatory framework applied to meat exports. This ensures both the halal integrity and food safety of Australian red meat. The Australian government authorised halal program has been developed in conjunction with input from several levels of government in Australia, overseas trade partners, Australian Islamic organisations and the Australian Meat Industry Council. This means that all steps of livestock sourcing, right through to processing, boning, packaging, storage and transport, are carefully monitored and in accordance with the regulatory oversight. Let me give you some examples of what would happen on my establishment. While my example really only reflects beef, because as you can see, I can't go anywhere without my cows. I'd like to talk you through our specific application within this standard. We purchase cattle for processing. We buy cattle supplied with a national vendor declaration, as we would abbreviate to an NVD. They also travel with a waybill. That is their transport document that permits them to travel. Not only that, the animals are also identified with an NLIS, that's a National Livestock Identification System transponder, which is attached to each bovine, and most commonly we find that in the animal's ear. There has been some people who have used a bolus within the stomach, but we find those hard to retrieve and the read rates aren't spectacular. It's much better in the ear. The documentation that we receive provides the legislative basis which declares the cattle identification, which property they came from, and its history of veterinary treatments, if any. The great thing about Australian cattle is that very little veterinary treatment is required. Further documents provides proof that the cattle have been reared under a system called Livestock Production Assurance, or LPA. This is an industry on-farm accreditation program that includes training and auditing elements. The electronic NIS device that we spoke about in the rear, that traces individual bovines' identity back to the farm and allows that to be validated against a national database. When we bring these purchased cattle onto our establishment, we ensure that they meet processing requirements, including anti-mortem inspection by a government veterinarian. This ensures that livestock are healthy and fit to slaughter. During the slaughter, cattle are stunned using a non-penetrative stunning device. The corneal reflex is checked as the animal comes out of the knocking box, and this allows us to maintain strict animal welfare standards. And I might just say that protects our social licence to operate in these times of animal welfare. The halal cut is then performed when we know that the animal's insensitive to pain, and that is performed by an authorised and trained halal slaughterman, and he's accredited through the Australian Islamic Organisation and acknowledged by JACM. After the halal cut is performed, that NIS device is registered into a computer and uploaded into the national database for traceability. This is maintained through to the weigh scale, where it is linked to a barcoded carcass tag, and it's once again for traceability. Each and every animal is checked for to ensure halal compliance with Malaysian protocols. If a carcass has a head cracked, they are considered non-halal in our establishment, and they are segregated. These non-halal carcasses are never allowed to come in contact with any product that is halal. So segregation is one of the key components of our Australian government authorised halal program. Following that, carcasses are chilled, boned and packed and stored ready for transport. While all establishments following a clearly regulated set of operating procedures, including HACCP and good manufacture process, to ensure maintenance of halal integrity and food safety. We call this our approved arrangement, and it in total is registered with the Australian government. We ensure that during the packaging phase, all our labelling requirements meet Malaysia's requirements, including the inner labels, which contain the details of the establishment and the logo of the authorised Islamic organisation. We employ a halal supervisor to directly oversee the whole halal production process, and our system is regularly audited by the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment, the authorised Islamic organisation recognised by JACM, as well as JACM itself. And its representatives in Australia include Mr. Izam from JACM, who occasionally visits our plant. All product is loaded with a seal on a container, and that seal is only broken by the Department of Australia agricultural representative or the importing country representative, and this guarantees the integrity and the food safety of the consignment. Only consignments which comply with all the above conditions are eligible and stamped with the Australian official halal mark and certified for the Australian halal certificate. And so it's a fairly comprehensive program, many moving parts, and I hope that answers your question, Rose.
Oh, thank you, Terry. It's really very insightful. Can I ask Valeska, what are the programs carried out by MLA to market halal Australian meat into Malaysia?
Thank you, Rose. And also very good morning to the fellow panelists, Sanjay and Terry. And Rose, thank you for organizing this session. I think we have heard from Sanjay about the regulatory aspects of it. How do we ensure that Australian beef and lamb that is coming into Malaysia market is regulatory and is underpinned by regulations? to maintain the integrity of the product. And we've also heard from Terry as well on how the industry, the processes are maintaining that line of sight and integrity across the whole supply chain. I think from MLA's perspective, it is then how do we, as a marketing organization for the red meat industry in Malaysia, make sure that the products that has been carefully produced by farmers in Australia with all the safety elements, the integrity elements, and the halal components of it are then passed on to customers and consumers in Malaysia. So in MLA, we understand that a lot of Australians beef and lamb gets exported internationally. So we are making sure that when it comes to Malaysia, we do have a range of programs that are in place in the markets to make sure that customers and consumers understand how Australian beef is produced and how do we then use those beef and lamb in the Malaysia context. We are very lucky. Rose is actually our country representative in Malaysia, and Rose and Pamela have been in place for over 30 years. Such is the importance of Malaysia for Australian beef and lamb sector. I think Malaysia imports around 21,000 tons of sheep meat and also around 9,000 tons of beef every year. So a large part of that goes into retail and food service. And from MLA, we are working with a large number of retailers and also food service partners to promote and educate how the consumers can actually use Australian beef and lamb, whether it's in their daily cooking or whether they can create fascinating dishes in restaurants and hotels. I think with the COVID disruptions that we are seeing at the moment, a lot of our marketing activities have to be done online. But we are happy to say that the retailers are still very much on board. And some of the programs that we are doing in Malaysia to try and market this include things like the Great Beef Escape that Rose is currently undertaking. This is actually to try and get consumers to become more familiar about how to use beef cuts and even including newer beef cuts in their daily cooking. I think we see that with COVID, 6 out of 10 consumers are now really trying to experiment more at home. So I would say that the best way to do that is to use the Australian halal beef to do that and from the comfort of your home. And this is part of the promotion that MLA is doing on behalf of the industry to try and promote halal Australian beef and lamb in the market. The other aspect of it, I think the promotion comes hand in hand with education. So apart from making sure that consumers know how to use Australian halal beef and lamb, we're also making sure that they are aware of the benefits of that. Nutrition-wise, Australian beef and lamb has got high level of nutrition, but I think there are other attributes that do make Australian beef and lamb different. Things like the geographical nature and the feed elements that go into the grass-fed and grain-fed beef. I think Nolan meats, for example, you produce a variety of those from your establishment as well. And the other thing is to make sure that consumers also know how to store Australian beef and lamb properly. I think there has been a lot of thought that goes into the processing, the shelf life components. We want to make sure that consumers actually know how to store and handle Australian beef and lamb properly. And that's part of some of our marketing programs in Malaysia as well.
Yeah,
thank you, Rose. That's kind of a bit of a snapshot.
Yeah, thank you, Valeska. Now, talking about COVID, that has affected many businesses around the world, even in Malaysia. So, Sanjay, as you know, COVID has had a big disruptor over the last 2 years. There was a real risk of it affecting the trade. Sanjay, how has our respective governments tackled these challenges? And is there anything you can share on the plans for the future?
Sure, Rose. Look, no doubt the pandemic has had a big impact. And it's quite unique, I guess, because it's affected, or it's disrupted both on the supply and the demand side. Quite unique compared to previous disruptions. We have worked extremely hard over the last year and a half to ensure that the health crisis didn't become a major food crisis. But it hasn't been without problems. From reduced access and increase in freight costs, difficulties with procurement of labor and other inputs to continue agriculture production, to name a few. In my view, close cooperation between governments and industry has been instrumental in ensuring supply chain of agriculture wasn't impacted a lot and for trade to continue. Now, determination by governments that agriculture and associated industries were essential, both here in Malaysia and in Australia, was an important decision early in the piece. And from a regulator's perspective, we also had to think about business continuity and look at reviewing and modifying the way in which we regulated the industry, our exports, while maintaining the standards of compliance and integrity that our trading partners expect of us. So that's been a significant challenge. In terms of future plans, we all know that this wasn't the first pandemic, this wasn't the last, so there's going to be other disruptions. We really, I think there's a broad acknowledgement within government and industry that we have to learn lessons from this, and we have to use this as an opportunity to look at improving our systems and processes to insulate against future shocks. The Australian government is using this opportunity, I guess, to implement a suite of reforms, which, among other things, include modernizing our export legislation to ensure that it is streamlined, it's proportionate and fit for purpose, looking at greater adoption of technology in how we deliver our services, and making improvements to our export systems. And all of this, I might add that we are doing that in close collaboration with our trading partners and industry back home. And all of these measures are designed to not only help with the short-term recovery, but, as I said, to insulate against future disruptions. We are working with many of our trading partners and Malaysian authorities included on specific initiatives that will help streamline our regulatory architecture, such as remote audits, e-certification. On e-certification, some of these markets have already transitioned or in the process of transitioning to paperless exchange, replacing many manual processes. One of the lessons we've learned, I guess, from this pandemic is the realization is that how much of our processes and systems rely on human-to-human interactions. So this is really an attempt to look at opportunities to try and minimize those interactions to insulate against future shocks. There are also flow-on benefits, I guess, for e-certification, as it allows for unprecedented level of security and allows for identification of fraudulent activity quickly and more efficiently. Not to mention faster clearance times for industry and reduced compliance costs for industry. And ultimately, these costs, bad regulation, I keep saying every time I have an opportunity, bad regulation costs money, and that money will be passed on to ultimately to consumers. So really, it's an opportunity for all of us to learn and make improvements to our respective systems. Thank you, Rose.
Thank you, Sanjay. Very interesting, especially about the e-documentation. So from the producers area, we find that there's affecting the COVID is affecting the supply and so on. So Terry, in light of COVID, can you please explain what are the challenges faced by the industry and how is the industry manages some of these challenges? Terry.
Thanks, Rose, and I'd compliment Sanjay on his summary. A lot of those issues, our Ag Minister said, this COVID pandemic has to be the catalyst for change, and the Australian government has certainly taken a lead role in implementing a lot of those systems on the ground. And but something we have no control over is one of our biggest challenges is the global shipping disruption. Nobody really understood how that would play out. And given that Australia supplies 80% of Malaysia's imported beef and sheep meat products, the availability of containers is a concern. The increased cost and the duration of those voyages is very concerning, as many ships are spending, extended times at sea waiting to dock. and so we're getting delays in shipping. That's a real worry. Our capacity to be able to get product to market is being severely affected by the restrictions in international flights, and Australian government has also assisted with an international flight mechanism to help that happening. Just back to Sanjay's point about e-certs, you know, the shipping disruptions cause one problem, but if we could move to a paperless certification system, we can see huge time savings for everybody. And even back as far as 2002, we did some trials into the US with a meat messaging system, which has been, you know, prototyped almost 20 years ago, but had poor uptake. What we see is this huge uptake in the last, you know, few months because of the need. So yes, we are preparing for what we will see in more pandemics, and to take our minister's words, it has to be the catalyst for change, for a new, more efficient way of doing business. So, you know, and Australian government is continuing to, you know, support flights into Southeast Asia, Singapore and those places. So that's really good. And that's been extended out till about March 2022. What we're finding is the need to build new relationships is just so important. You know, many years ago, you'd never think of holding an international forum on Teams meeting, but we've all become Teams experts in the last 12 months, and business has gone on. And to some degree, we've become more efficient. So we need to keep looking and utilising this new technology. And, you know, I think technology is an opportunity for Australian and Malaysian partners to work closer together, work closer with DVS. Perhaps there might be some model of remote audit, or with JACM. You know, the travel restrictions are, you could say, prohibitive at the moment. Even at that point, at plant level, our plant has been trialling augmented reality through the use of smart glasses, and this is showing promise, not just to restrict high-risk people from travel, but also to bring efficiencies and reduce the cost or virtually eliminate travel. So that's really exciting. And I implore our department to keep working with DS and JACM on these opportunities for collaboration. The use of technology is the future, and we want to be partners with Malaysia in developing the most sophisticated use of technology in the world.
Yeah, Terry, thank you. Yeah, it's really very important for the relationship building, and I do get a lot of feedback from the trade, and they do really highlight the fact that, you know, relationship is very important, and they have a lot of challenges with the supply and logistic and so on. So even despite with all these challenges, I think Valeska, can you share how Australian meat is promoted in the midst of the pandemic to grow and sustain consumer interest and demand?
Yes, thanks, Rose. And I think it's been a very challenging 18 months. I think we're almost 18 months into the pandemic itself, and almost all of Southeast Asia is sort of still working through our second or third wave at the moment, as well as Australia. And I think that what we have seen in the probably last year is that consumers are also changing how they're changing their buying habits, changing their consumption habits. And likewise, this also applies for beef and lamb. So I think what we're seeing is that consumers are gravitating more towards food that they can trust, safer food, safer products, but also products that not only nourish their body, but nourishes their mind, their soul. And there's also that gravitation towards heritage and comfort food. I think everyone, maybe because they can't travel, are spending more time at home. It's really about family and heritage and culture. So we're seeing a little bit more of a shift towards those types of cooking methods as well. So I think what we're doing in Malaysia, and Rose has been you've been a part of this as well, is really how do we then, again, get consumers to try different ways of cooking beef and lamb at home using Australian beef. I think there's a bit of a misconception previously that Australian beef and lamb are difficult to use for local cuisines, but that's not the case. I think that there's a number of cuisines that can be cooked with Australian beef and lamb. I think we see we'll hear I think tomorrow or next week about how Australian beef is being used in beef rendang recipes, or in some of the other more traditional recipes that in Malaysian cuisine. So it's really about that aspect of getting consumers to be very familiar about how to use Australian beef and lamb. Again, that's partly because I think Aussie beef and lamb is the best product in the world. The farmers put a lot of care into it. Nothing's left to chance. And I think consumers need to trust that you're not only getting nutritious food, it's also of high quality and safe, wholesome and halal. And then the last bit of it is just then how do we make sure that you are confidently using it in your cooking. So from a beef perspective, that's what we're doing. I think lamb, because actually Malaysia is the second largest lamb and sheep meat import for Australia. And for lamb itself, we are doing more around the Lambassador program. It's really to try and get chefs to innovate in terms of how they use lamb in their cooking, and hope then that translates to consumers as well. I think, again, COVID-19, a catalyst for change, as Nolan, you mentioned. I'm also hoping that it will accelerate some of the things we're seeing online and digital, and therefore a lot of our activities in the future will also be gravitating on that online platforms as well. Thank you, Rose.
Yeah, thanks, Valeska. There's a lot of work by the red meat industry and MLA and the Australian government to support the trade in Malaysia. So this is just nearly more than 30 years, all these activities has been ongoing. So given the long history of trade between Australia and Malaysia, Sanjay, can I ask you, what is the Australian government plan to further enhance the business with Malaysia, Sanjay? Can you share some thoughts on this?
Sure, thanks, Rose. As you rightly point out, the Malaysia-Australia trade, we have a long history. We've been trading for decades. It's a mature market. There's been strong relationships across government, across industry for a very long time. So your question about how do we sort of boost this further? Firstly, I guess the Australian government role is to ensure that the trading environment, so we are the enablers of trade, so we ensure that the trading environment is strong and continues to support the growth in business. And it's never been better. In fact, we've got, as you know, the MAFTA agreement, which was signed close to a decade ago. We've got the ANZFTA agreement. We've also got recently a commitment to sign up to the RCEP, which is one of the largest regional trade agreements. And then we've also committed to the CPTPP, and Malaysia is also considering that. And in addition to that, in recognition of the strong bilateral relationships we have had with Malaysia over many, many decades, and the strong people-to-people links we have, both our prime ministers earlier this year in January elevated our bilateral relationship to what we now know as the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. Now, Malaysia only has that relationship with China, and we've only got that relationship with very few countries in this region. So that's a reflection of the maturity of our relationship and the strength of our relationship. And under the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, one of the key important pillars is food security and our agricultural relationship. So I expect so that'll be a strong, I guess, foundation for us to grow that business. As I said earlier in my remarks, we can do a lot more. We've had a strong growth, but we also can do a lot more, particularly around the halal food trade, which will benefit both countries. All the data I have seen on the growth of halal globally points to a multi-trillion-dollar industry by the middle of this decade. And Australia's strong halal credentials, production systems, and Malaysia's, I guess, strong leadership around halal certification and their strengths in the competitive advantage in terms of manufacturing and value-adding sectors, I think puts us both in a very strong position to capitalize on that growth. The Australian government's also investing recently over $70 million to help Australian agri-businesses expand their markets and diversify their markets. And we call that the Agri-Business Expansion Initiative. That's a whole of government initiative that we're working with Austrade in helping industry to sort of expand and grow their markets into different, to sort of diversify their markets. So key elements include, market expansion, boosted in-country engagement activities, accelerated work on technical market access, and greater collection of delivery of market intelligence to exporters. Now, through this funding, Austrade is also delivering scaled-up support to over 2,000 agribusiness exporters each year. And my colleagues in Austrade and Malaysia have reliably informed me that there's a significant uptick in inquiries, serious inquiries from Australian businesses and Malaysian businesses who want to partner with each other to capitalize on that significant growth we can expect over the next decade, particularly around the halal, the value-added sectors. But the success of all of this, can I say, will largely depend on making halal business-friendly. And what I really mean by that is while halal is extremely important from a religious observance point of view and protocol, it needs to be conducive to business. And we've spoken about this in successive World Halal conferences, that for us to capitalize on that significant growth, religious compliance and halal compliance is important, but it needs to be conducive. And what we mean by that is that rules, regulations around halal needs to be consistent, needs to be predictable, needs to be transparent. And that gives certainty, I guess, for investments, certainty for businesses who want to do business here or in the regions. And it's also a huge opportunity for, I guess, both Malaysia and Australia to work together in looking at just that. And the good news is, over the last couple of years, we've had terrific relationships, with the Malaysian authorities, the Department of Veterinary Services, JAKIM, and the Malaysian Quarantine Inspection Services. I think there is a will, there is a strong commitment on both sides to sort of look at these very opportunities to streamline, look at opportunities to sort of make it easier for trade and boost that and capitalize, I guess, on that enormous growth potential. I'll leave it there, but I'm interested in hear, I guess, industry views and views from my other panelists.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you for the information. So I'd like to ask Terry, Australia has more than 200 years history in producing beef and lamb and has made significant reputation in supplying to over 120 countries, including Muslim countries. What are the advantages of purchasing beef and lamb from Australia?
Oh, Rose, up front, I would have to say that we are regarded as a reliable supplier. We have excellent animal health status. We have an enviable food safety reputation amongst many countries around the world, and that extended shelf life that food safety delivers is highly valued in many, many markets. We certainly respect Malaysia's food safety and halal requirements, and we invest in our own businesses and our own systems to make sure that we can deliver to meet those requirements. We certainly have a commitment. While some export countries are reducing their footprint in Malaysia over the years, we proudly maintain our position in that market and are keen to grow it. Australia, we believe, is an innovative country. We think we can assist with innovation. We're always looking for new ways to grow, to innovate, whether it be investing in new technologies like we spoke of earlier, practices or even halal training. For example, just recently, Australia has developed formal halal training framework for the halal slaughter and processing, including a nationally recognised set of competencies. So we are very keen to foster and build even stronger relationships with Malaysia as a partner or a supplier of high quality halal meat. So yeah, reliability, respect, commitment, innovation and partnership, relationship building are the key components that I see.
Thank you, Terry. So Sanjay, what is your outlook on this? Can you give us some thoughts on?
Sorry, in terms of
from the government point of view, what is the advantages of purchasing beef and lamb from Australia, from the compliance? Can you give some outlook?
Look, I agree with a lot of the comments made by Terry. I think our strong regulatory systems, our commitment to halal. We are one of the first non-Muslim countries in the world to have legislated halal. So halal is enshrined in every part of our legislation. We export over 70% of what we produce. So our exporters over the years have gained a lot of knowledge and experience in adapting their systems to meet importing country requirements from a lot of our trading partners. So they're good at what they do and they're good at adapting their systems. It's in their best, it's in their business interest to do that because exports are a big part of their incomes. So we are totally committed to the halal cause. But we're also keen to work with our trading partners to ensure regulations are proportionate, regulations are transparent and predictable to enable business to continue. Because the last thing we want is to scare people away from the markets because it's too complex or too difficult to understand the rules, or whether if the rules are too inconsistently applied. So that's always been our focus, is to assist with those discussions with our trading partners to ensure that those inadvertent consequences of any new rules that come into play are properly discussed and thought through before they are implemented. And look, we have a complementary relationship. There's quite a lot of critiques out there who are anti-imports or there's a lot of sentiments around imports are bad and countries should be looking at more self-sufficiency sort of agenda. I've got a different view. We've discussed this, and there's lots of literature out there which supports that argument where the real discussion ought to be on food security, not self-sufficiency, because that makes economic sense, that makes environmental sense. By 2050, we've got to produce 50-60% more food than what we produce today. We've got to do it with less land, less impact on our environment, and I think it makes perfect economic sense to use individual countries' competitive advantages to do that. So we are good at producing. We've got the land, we've got the environment to produce, and we've got the track record. Whereas other countries are good at a whole raft of other things that we're not good at or we're not likely to get into. So I think it's important to capitalize on those individual strengths and work together to meet global food security needs. It's not just about self-sufficiency, because self-sufficiency does not guarantee food security.
Thank you, Sanjay. So to the Malaysian consumers, Valeska, what do you think is unique about Australian beef and lamb that resonate well for the consumer in Malaysia?
Thanks, Rose. And I think both Sanjay and Terry had touched upon some of the elements as well. We spoke about the heritage over 200 years that Australia has been producing beef and lamb. We also spoke about our high standards and systems that are in place in Australia, whether it's food safety, traceability, and other aspects as well, including halal. And lastly, I think we also spoke about the unique nature. Almost all Australian beef and lamb start off on grass. We've got wide, lush pastures across the different states and territories that offer very unique profiles of beef and lamb. I think that Australia itself, because we're such a vast country, we can produce beef and lamb of different profiles depending on your feed regimes. And being a Malaysian consumer, I would like to think that, it's a bit of an eating experience to be able to try those different profiles. Maybe it's your Victorian lamb versus your Queensland beef. That those are very different, unique environments that they grow up on. And I think that the more companies are able to get into Malaysia, the more that that Malaysian consumers are able to expand their palate, and therefore I think at the end of the day, be able to really see what Australia can provide them, and ultimately is that pure enjoyment that Australian beef and lamb can provide for Malaysian consumers. We use a true Aussie beef and lamb logo that you can see on the screen top left-hand corner here to promote beef and lamb globally, including in Malaysia. I think it's a bit of a shortcut, a symbol of that when you see this logo on pack in your supermarkets, in stores, you can be assured that they are coming from Australia, and it represents beef and lamb that you can trust, that's safe, halal, and ultimately provide really great enjoyment for you and your family.
Thank you, Alaska. There's a lot of support given to the trade and the consumer in terms of educating them on the meat. So, Terry, I'd like to ask you, what do you see as a significant business opportunities in the halal space for Malaysia?
Rose, yes, thank you, Rose. If I could just go back to Sanjay's last comment about food security. Food security is going to become a huge issue as we move forward with a burgeoning population. For that, Australia wants to be a part of solving a lot of people's food security issues, because we think we are good at producing food. We also appreciate that Malaysia is positioning itself as a key halal production hub. I think that we can be partners in this growth opportunity and help each other. I think Australia could supply the raw ingredients and Malaysia could do the value adds, and it could underpin both our countries' shared halal accreditation systems. So I think there's a magnificent opportunity there to work together in the face of food security with the best grown beef in the world, in coordination with Malaysia, with a recognised halal hub, and I think there's huge opportunities for everyone in that space.
Terry. Sanjay, what about you? What is your perspective on this in terms of the business opportunities?
Look, Rose, I couldn't agree more with Terry. I've made a few points earlier that there is significant opportunities for us to work together in the value-adding sector in particular. Our close proximity, our long history of trade, the systems we have, all lends itself to better partnerships than we've enjoyed in the past, particularly with business-to-business partnerships. And as I said, as part of the World Halal Conference and the work the Halal Development Corporation is doing in relation to the business-to-business matching, we've received significant inquiries here, and Austrade, my colleagues in Austrade, are working with industry in looking at those opportunities to match businesses in Malaysia to sort of further grow the trade. But as Terry said earlier, we have been a reliable supplier to Malaysia for many decades, and we don't take our position in the market for granted. So often, I say to people that supply reliability is one of our key attributes. If you think about all the challenges our producers had to go through over the last 4 or 5 years, with bushfires, with floods, extended drought, we have continued to sort of maintain our position in the market, and that is by no means an accident. It's actually a deliberate decision for us to sort of work with these markets, and we've been quite successful in that. We've had our challenges, but we've continued to sort of place that importance that these markets deserve. So I'll leave it there, Rose. But I think, yeah, there's huge opportunities. And as I said, the enabling environment is there in terms of the trade. So it's just a matter of, businesses now taking up those opportunities when they come.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sanjay. So, Valeska, I'd like to ask you, what plans are there to support these business opportunities, Valeska? Can you share some thoughts on this?
Yeah, definitely. I think as Terry and Sanjay mentioned, we can see that Malaysia is a strong export hub for halal. I think beyond halal itself, from MLA's perspective of what we're doing in market, it's really we want to support businesses grow their business for Australian beef and lamb, and I think there's plenty that we can do in that space. Apart from marketing and educational programs, one thing that I'm really keen to explore is also on that digital hub. Given that we are kind of very digitally connected these days, what do businesses want to do more in that space? I think there's opportunities, and also including in that traceability elements as well. How do we then make use of that digital connectivity to reach the rest of the world? Be part of that global value chain. Malaysia is very well positioned to do that. Australia is also very well positioned to do that. So I think as MLA, we are then probably be that facilitator and bridge to grow the business and to grow the industry.
Yeah, okay, Valeska. So, Terry, do you have any comment on if you like, if there's any comment on the first question, Terry?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Rose. I'm not aware of the question that has been posted there, the intricate detail of that, but it's concerning a cartel of non-halal imports. It's not an area that I should comment on, but I'd just like to say that technology can provide answers in that space. With our program into the US, our meat messaging, we can send a full detailed list of every single barcode, every single carton weight, every product item, and it can be transferred with real time. People can get it ahead of their shipment. They know what will arrive, and the authorities on the importing country, who are responsible for border security, they are then armed with the correct data before they even open the container. That allows a quick check-off. So we couldn't do that years ago, but technology has allowed us to transfer critical information quickly ahead of the sea voyage arriving, or for that matter, ahead of the air freight arriving, and it sort of arms the border security people, the importing country regulatory authorities, with a lot more information than they've ever had. So whilst we can't play a part in cartel behaviour and falsification of goods, technology can, and Australia is a good partner, well developed down this path. And that question to me means that we should be accelerating our adoption of technology. And I think Australian government, Australian industry can help Malaysian government and Malaysian industry with solutions. We can't do it for every other country, but we can do it within our own partnership. And I think I'm not sure of who's asked the question, but I think it's a very good question that can be solved by the adoption of technology. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. I think, talking about the cartel of non-halal imports, Sanjay, you are in the country. And last year, there was some news reporting about the cartel of non-halal products. Would you like to give some, some perspective on this matter? Because you are right in Malaysia when this happened last year.
Yes, I remember I was in Penang around Christmas time when it happened. But look, I couldn't agree more with what Terry just said. We've got the technology, we've got the, as I said, we had advanced discussions with the Malaysian authorities in looking at just that, like e-certification, etc. But in relation to the cartel issue, one of the pleasing things that happened, I guess, was whilst there was reports or inaccurate reports in the media that some of that meat could have come from Australia, it wasn't true. There were statements subsequently issued by the Malaysian government that there was no evidence to suggest that the meat was from Australia. So that's first point. Secondly, the matter is under investigation, and we've been assisting with any information. We are open and willing to assist the Malaysian authorities, but it is under investigation, so I would not like to comment on the specifics of the matter. But cartels will operate. There'll be a small minority of individuals or entities who are bound to do the wrong thing, and who will try and try and take shortcuts, I guess. So we have the big stick approach for that. We've got the technology to sort of prevent that from happening. But the good news is that our systems, our traceability systems, our checks and balances that we've pretty much covered during this hour gives us a lot of confidence and assurance that the likelihood of these sort of cartels emerging from Australia is next to non-existent, in my view.
Yeah. Sanjay, I was told that the health and halal certificate, there's a security coded in that document, and so the importer has no worries about the product coming to Malaysia with those certification that is provided for the products. Yeah.
That's right. So the Australian halal logo. So obviously the consignments that come into Malaysia have the Islamic organizations, the halal certification body logos, and the Australian government logo. So you've actually got two regulatory authorities overseeing the certification process. So you can be, consumers, as I said earlier, can be assured that when you see that stamp, when you see that logo and the halal certificate issued from Australia, you can have absolute confidence that the entire supply chain and all the processes that led to that certificate complies with the highest food safety and halal integrity standards. And that's what our trading partners expect of us, and that's what we deliver.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanjay. So I think we are coming close to the closing of this forum. And as I understand, the trading relationship between Australia and Malaysia is more than 60 years. And no doubt, hearing from the three speakers today, all the work and efforts in Australian meat, achieving the halal and food safety compliance, and the commitment and integrity from the industry, and the investment devoted to marketing the product for more than 30 years in Malaysia, ensures that all Malaysian consumers enjoy Australian meat that is halal, it's safe, it's tender, and it's healthy. And this really amplifies the fact that Malaysia and Australia are truly trusted halal partners. So we'd like to thank the panelists for very insightful comments and information and updates. And we also like to thank the audience for spending an hour with us in this forum. In the meantime, if you like to get some facts and information on halal Australian meat, you can actually get it from the MLA microsite in the Mihas virtual exhibition website. And we could also help you to link up with the exporters who are able to help you in supplying the products to Malaysia. So if you have any inquiries, or if you have any information that you will be interested to find out, we will be very happy to help you. And at the end of this forum, there is a polling whereby there are two questions that we'd like you to answer, and it will help us to improve our forum in the near future. And if there's any interest in getting the point of sale for Australian beef lamb, and if you are interested in our campaigns, please do not hesitate to contact us, because we are here to help you to have more safe and halal products. And thank you to everybody. And we hope you stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Rose.
Thank you,
Terry
Rose.
and Sanjay.
Thank you.